Good day, everyone. Today I'll be discussing an essential concept in Philippine succession law, the legitime. This legal principle, outlined in the Civil Code of the Philippines, plays a vital role in ensuring that compulsory heirs, such as children, parents, and spouses, are guaranteed a minimum portion of a deceased person's estate, regardless of the provisions in the decedent's will. Understanding legitime is crucial because it protects family rights, prevents unjust disinheritance, and balances the testator's freedom with the legal entitlements of heirs. Throughout this presentation, I'll cover its definition, legal basis, and significance, and explain how it impacts estate distribution in the Philippines. Let's get started. Legitime is a crucial concept in Philippine succession law as provided under the Civil Code of the Philippines. It refers to the minimum portion of a deceased person's estate that is legally reserved for compulsory heirs, regardless of any provisions in the decedent's will. This legal safeguard ensures that certain family members, known as compulsory heirs, are guaranteed a share of the estate, thereby protecting their financial security and preventing disinheritance without just cause. Under Civil Code of the Philippines, Article 886, legitim is the part of the testator's property which he cannot dispose because the law has reserved it for certain heirs who are therefore called compulsory heirs. So, compulsory heirs, the law designates certain individuals as compulsory heirs, ensuring that their legitim is legally protected and allocated as follows. In the Philippines, we have three classifications of compulsory heir: the primary compulsory heir, the secondary compulsory heirs, and the illegitimate children. Under the primary compulsory heirs, we have legitimate children and their descendants and the surviving spouse. Legitimate children and their descendants are entitled to half of the estate divided equally. If a legitimate children, if a legitimate child predeceases the testator, their descendants inherit through the right of representation, while surviving spouse shares in the legitim with the legitimate children. The spouse share is equal to that of one legitimate child. Under the secondary compulsory heirs, we have legitimate parents and ascendants and the surviving spouse. Legitimate parents and ascendants are entitled to half of the estate, but only if the decedent has no legitimate children or descendants. The surviving spouse shares the legitim with the ascendants. If sharing with ascendants, receive half of the estate. If no ascendants exist, inherits the entire estates. The third compulsory heirs are the illegitimate children, entitled to half the share of a legitimate child. They can only inherit from the free portion of the estate after the legitim of all compulsory heirs has been satisfied. At this juncture, we have the amount of legitim. The table outlines the distribution of the estate among compulsory heirs under Philippine succession law, showing how the estate is divided between the legitim, the reserved portion for compulsory heirs, and the free portion, the part that the stator can freely dispose of through a will. First, we have legitimate children only. Half of the estate is allocated to the legitimate children, divided equally among them. The remaining half of the estate can be freely distributed by the testator through their will. Second is the legitimate children and the surviving spouse. Half of the estate is allocated to the legitimate children and the surviving spouse, shared equally. The remaining half of the estate is the free portion, which the testator can dispose of. The third is the surviving spouse only. The surviving spouse receives half of the estates, while the remaining half is free for disposition. The fourth one is the legitimate parents, no children. Half of the estate goes to the legitimate parents, and the remaining half is free for the testator to dispose of. Fifth is the illegitimate children. Half of the estate is reserved for the illegitimate children divided equally, and the remaining half is free for disposition. The sixth is the illegitimate children and the surviving spouse. Half of the estate is divided into two equal shares. The spouse receives half of the legitimate, and the illegitimate children share the other half of the legitimate, divided equally among them, while the remaining half of the estate is the free portion. Seventh is the legitimate parents and the surviving spouse. Half of the estate is divided into two equal shares. The spouse receives half of the legitimate, and the legitimate parents receive the other half of the legitimate, while the remaining half of the estate is free for the testator to dispose of. In all cases, the estate is divided into two portions: the legitimate, which is protected by law and cannot be freely disposed of; the free portion, which the testator can distribute through their will, and the table clearly shows how the estate is distributed depending on the combination of compulsory heirs. Now let's go to the key rules on legitimate in Philippine succession. First, we have the immutability of legitim. The legitim is fixed by law and cannot be reduced by the testator's actions. This means that any donations, gifts, or dispositions made by the testator that would disadvantage compulsory heirs are invalid or reducible. Even if the testator explicitly states in their will that they wish to exclude a compulsory heir, the legitimate portion remains protected. This rule ensures that compulsory heirs receive their rightful share, safeguarding their inheritance rights. Second is the right of representation. When a legitimate child predeceases the testator, their descendants inherit their legitimate share. This follows the principle of res stirpes, which means the inheritance is divided by family branch rather than per individual. For example, if a deceased child had two children, they jointly inherit their parents' legitimate shares. This right ensures that the heir's lineage retains their inheritance rights even if the primary heir is no longer alive. The third one is the rights of illegitimate children. Illegitimate children are entitled to a legitimate share equal to half of that of a legitimate child. This reflects the legal distinction between legitimate and illegitimate children in inheritance rights. Illegitimate children cannot inherit against legitimate ascendants or descendants except through the free portion of the estate. This means they can only claim inheritance from the free portion after the legitimate of the compulsory heirs has been satisfied. This rule upholds the hierarchical rights of legitimate heirs over illegitimate heirs. Next is the surviving spouse right. Entitlement to legitim, the surviving spouse is always entitled to a legitimate share regardless of whether they inherit alongside children or ascendants. This ensures that the spouse cannot be disinherited without just cause and retains their rightful portion of the estate. If the marriage is governed by absolute community property or conjugal partnership of gains, the surviving spouse is entitled to their share of the conjugal property before the estate is distributed. This means that the surviving spouse first receives their portion of the common property under the marital regime separate from their legitimate. Only the remaining estate is subject to inheritance distribution. This rule protects the financial interest of the surviving spouse, preventing their property rights from being diminished by inheritance claims. Last one is the rights of adopted children. Adopted children have the same inheritance rights as legitimate children. They are entitled to an equal legitimate share, ensuring they are treated as full legal heirs. This reflects the principle of equal protection under the law, granting adopted children the same legal status as biological children in matters of inheritance. The key rules on legitim highlights the legal safeguards in Philippine succession law that protect the legitim of compulsory heirs. The immutability rule prevents the testator from unfairly reducing the legitim. The right of representation preserves the inheritance rights of the deceased heirs' descendants. The limitation on illegitimate children uphold the legal distinction between legitimate and illegitimate heirs, ensuring proper distribution of the estate. The surviving spouse's exclusive right to conjugal property ensures they receive their rightful share before inheritance distribution, and the adopted children's equal inheritance rights promote fairness, treating them the same as biological children in terms of legitimate entitlement. This is the representation of my family tree. So this is me, uh, the one who's at the lower left corner. I have no descendants, so my compulsory heirs would be my parents, Jeanette Salazar and Narciso Salazar. Why one half of the legitim will go to the legitimate parents. One, the decedent is a legitimate person. Since the decedent is a legitimate person, their legitimate parents are considered secondary compulsory heirs under Philippine succession law. When a legitimate person dies without descendants, their legitimate parents have the right to inherit a portion of the estate as compulsory heirs. Second, only secondary heirs are present. In this scenario, there are no legitimate or illegitimate children or descendants. Since primary compulsory heirs are absent, the secondary compulsory heirs step in. According to the Civil Code, if there are no primary heirs, the secondary heirs become entitled to the legitimate. Third, the secondary compulsory heirs are the parents. The decedent's legitimate parents are the secondary compulsory heirs, and they are entitled to receive half of the estate as their legitim. This is in line with Article 887 of the Civil Code, which grants secondary heirs a legitim share when primary heirs are absent. Fourth, grandparents are excluded due to the rule of preference between lines. Under Philippine succession law, there is a rule of preference between lines which gives parents priority over grandparents. Since the direct ascendants or the parents are still alive, the grandparents are excluded from inheriting. The principle follows the legal hierarchy in succession. Parents over grandparents. Grandparents only inherit if the parents are no longer alive. Therefore, only the decedent's parents receive the legitimate share while the grandparents are excluded. The application of succession law in real life situations and the significance of estate planning. First, the application of the law on successions in real-time situations. Succession law plays a vital role in real-life scenarios, particularly in ensuring the fair and orderly distribution of a deceased person's estate. Here's how it applies in practice. The protection of compulsory heirs. In cases where a person dies with a will, the testate succession, the law ensures that compulsory heirs receive their rightful share of the estate. Even if the testator attempts to exclude compulsory heirs, the law protects their legitim, preventing disinheritance without just cause. For example, if a parent drops a will leaving the entire estate to a friend or charity, the children or spouse can claim their legitim as it is protected by law. The inheritance disputes and claims. Succession law resolves disputes over inheritance by clearly defining the rights of compulsory heirs and the distribution rules. For instance, in blended families or cases with illegitimate children, the law ensures that each heir receives their appropriate legitimate share, preventing unfair treatment. The right of representation in real life. The principle of first therapies ensures that the descendants of a deceased heir still inherit their parents' share. For example, if a legitimate child predeceases that testator, their own children or the grandchildren of the decedent will inherit their parents' legitimate by right of representation. The challenges in intestate succession. When a person dies without a will, the law dictates how the estate is divided, prioritizing primary heirs, the children and the spouse, over secondary heirs, the parents and descendants. This ensures that inheritance follows a clear legal hierarchy, preventing confusion and disputes. Lastly, significance of estate planning, identifying the compulsory heirs and free portions of the estate. Estate planning is crucial in ensuring that a person's assets are distributed according to their wishes while still complying with succession law. It involves compulsory heirs, the legitimate portions, and the free portions. So, why estate planning is important? It ensures fair distribution. Estate planning allows individuals to allocate their free portion to specific heirs, friends, or charities while still protecting the legitimate of compulsory heirs. This ensures that both legal obligations and personal wishes are respected. For example, a testator with children may choose to leave part of the free portion to a charitable cause while ensuring their children receive their legal legitimate share. It prevents legal dispute. Clear estate planning reduces conflicts among heirs by specifying who receives which portion of the estate. It minimizes the risk of legal battles over inheritance rights. For example, explicitly stating how the free portion will be distributed can prevent disagreements between siblings or other heirs. It protects the interests of illegitimate and adopted children. Through estate planning, the testator can include illegitimate or adopted children in the free portion to ensure they receive a share beyond their legitimate. This is particularly significant in cases where the legitimate portion is limited. It maximizes tax efficiency. Estate planning can help reduce estate tax liabilities, ensuring that heirs receive the maximum possible benefit from the estate. Proper structuring of the estate can minimize unnecessary taxation. That would be my report. Thank you.